Imagine you're on trial, and the prosecutor is relentless. You're not good enough. You'll never make it. Remember when you failed? You sit there, defendant in your own mind, trying to prove your worth. Trying to build a case for why you deserve happiness, why you deserve success, why you deserve love. And the prosecutor just keeps coming. Every mistake you've ever made, every time you fell short, every moment of weakness, the evidence mounts, and you're exhausted because you've been on trial every single day of your life. Now imagine the judge leans forward and says this. This prosecutor doesn't work for this court. He broke in. He has no jurisdiction here. That voice you've been answering to, it was never appointed by God. It was never authorized by your soul. It's a squatter in the courthouse of your consciousness. And today, we're issuing the eviction notice. You see, I've worked with thousands of people over my lifetime. I've sat across from the successful and the struggling, the faithful and the despairing. And do you know what they all have in common? Every single one of them? They're having a conversation inside their head that they think is them. They think the voice that criticizes them is their conscience. They think the voice that warns them is their wisdom. They think the voice that doubts them is their realism. And they've been taking orders from this voice their entire lives without ever asking the most important question. Is this voice even mine? Or have I been answering to an imposter? Let me tell you why you need to hear this today. Right now. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel more ready. Now. Because you're exhausted, you're tired of fighting yourself. You've tried positive thinking, and it lasted 3 days. You've tried affirmations, and they felt like lies in your mouth. You've tried to be more confident, more faithful, more certain, and the moment you step out the door, that voice comes roaring back. You're not enough. Who do you think you are? Remember last time you tried? You're going to fail again, and you think the problem is you. You think you're broken. You think you're uniquely damaged or weak or cursed with a negative mind. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is you've been suffering from a case of mistaken identity. The voice in your head, the one that's been narrating your inadequacy for years, that's not you. It's not your soul. It's not your subconscious mind. It's the voice of every wound you've ever collected. It's your mother's anxiety, your father's disappointment, your teacher's impatience, your first rejection, your worst failure. Every time someone made you feel small, every time the world punished your bigness, every time you reached for something beautiful and got hurt, a recording was made, and that recording plays on a loop. And because it's been playing so long, because it learned to say I, and me and my, you believed it was you. But here's what the world doesn't tell you. Here's what even most spiritual teachers miss. Your subconscious mind, the 90% of you that runs below conscious awareness, the part of you that beats your heart and digests your food and heals your cuts without you thinking about it, that part of you is directly connected to infinite intelligence, to God, to the creative power of the universe. And it doesn't speak in that critical, fearful, repetitive voice. It doesn't sound like panic. It doesn't rehearse disaster. It speaks in a whisper, a knowing, a quiet certainty, and you've been ignoring it your whole life because you thought the loudest voice was the truest voice. I'm going to show you something today that will change everything. I'm going to show you how to tell the difference between the voice of fear and the voice of God, between the ego and the subconscious, between the learned mind and the real you. And once you see it, once you really understand it, you'll stop fighting yourself. You'll stop trying to fix your thoughts. Because you'll realize the thoughts you've been trying to fix were never yours to begin with. Let me tell you about a man who came to see me years ago. We'll call him David. David was in his 40s, successful by every external measure. Good job, nice home, respected in his community. But he was dying inside. He sat in my office, and he said something I'll never forget. He said, "Dr. Murphy, I feel like I'm split in two. Like there's a civil war happening in my mind every single moment of every single day. I try to pray. I try to affirm good things. I say, I am confident. I say, I am worthy. I say, I am prosperous." And instantly, another voice cancels it out. It says, "No, you're not. Remember when you failed? Look at your bank account. Who are you trying to fool? And I don't know which voice to believe anymore. I don't know which one is me. I looked at him and I asked a very simple question. I said, which voice speaks first? The affirming one or the attacking one? He stopped. He really thought about it. And then he said quietly, the attacking one. Always. It's always there first. Like it's waiting for me. I nodded. And then I asked him something that made his face go pale. I said, does it sound like your voice, or does it sound like someone else's? And he just stared at me. His mouth opened but nothing came out, and then tears started rolling down his face. And he whispered, it sounds like my father. Oh God. It sounds exactly like my father. When I was young, whenever I got excited about something, whenever I wanted to try something new, he'd look at me with this expression, this mix of pity and contempt, and he'd say, you'll never amount to anything. Don't get your hopes up. You're going to embarrass yourself. And I hated him for it. I swore I'd never be like him. But the voice in my head, it's his voice. I've been carrying him around inside me for 40 years. Do you understand what happened in that moment? David realized he'd been taking orders from a ghost. He realized that the prosecutor in his mental courtroom, the one who'd been putting him on trial every day, had no authority. It was his father's fear, his father's limitation, his father's pain. And because David heard it at such a young age, when he was forming his sense of self, he absorbed it. He internalized it. It became the background music of his life, and he never questioned it because it felt like him. But here's what I told David, and here's what I'm telling you right now. That voice, no matter how familiar it feels, no matter how much it sounds like you, is not you. It's a recording. And your subconscious mind, the real you, the part of you connected to infinite intelligence, doesn't argue. It doesn't doubt. It doesn't say, yes, but. The subconscious mind only accepts. It only creates. When you say I am confident from a place of feeling, from a place of deep acceptance, your subconscious says, yes, done, I'll show you evidence of that. It immediately goes to work arranging circumstances, opening doors, giving you ideas, leading you to the right people. But when you say I am confident with doubt, when you let that attacking voice have the last word, you're actually impressing the doubt into your subconscious instead. You're planting a seed of fear in the garden that only knows how to say yes. So the question isn't whether you can control your thoughts. The question is, which thoughts are you identifying with? Which voice are you giving your agreement to? Because the moment you stop answering that critical voice, the moment you stop defending yourself to it, it loses all its power. But I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, okay, Dr. Murphy, that sounds beautiful, but how? How do I stop answering a voice that feels so real, so urgent, so much like me? How do I even tell the difference when I'm in the middle of panic, when I'm gripped by fear, when that voice is screaming at me? Let me give you another image. Another way to see this. Imagine your subconscious mind as a garden. Infinite, fertile, always saying yes to whatever seed you plant. This garden doesn't judge the seeds. It doesn't say, oh, this is a fear seed, I won't grow this one. Or, oh, this is a love seed, I'll grow this extra big. No, the garden just grows. That's its nature. Whatever you plant, it accepts. Whatever you water with your attention and feeling, it multiplies. Now imagine that for years, for most of your life, you've had a gardener working in this garden. But here's the thing. You never hired him. He just showed up one day when you were very young, when you were vulnerable and afraid, and trying to make sense of the world, and he started planting seeds. Seeds of you're not safe. Seeds of people will hurt you. Seeds of don't trust yourself. Seeds of the world is dangerous and you're not equipped to handle it. And because he's been there so long, because he's the only gardener you've ever known, you assumed he was you. You assumed his planting was your choice. You took responsibility for a garden you didn't actually plant. But here's the revelation. You are not the gardener. You're the owner of the garden. The true you, the subconscious self, the part of you that's connected to the divine, has been waiting patiently for you to realize what happened, waiting for you to fire the imposter, waiting for you to take back the seeds. And the moment you realize that the fearful planting isn't yours, the moment you see that this gardener doesn't work for you, everything shifts. You don't have to fight the weeds. You don't have to argue with the thorns. You simply stop watering them. You stop giving them your attention, your agreement, your identification, and you start planting something new. God doesn't speak to you in panic. Let me say that again because it's crucial. God does not speak to you in panic. God doesn't rehearse disaster. God doesn't narrate your inadequacy. That's the ego. That's the false gardener. That's the collection of every fearful thing you ever learned from people who were themselves afraid. The real voice, the subconscious whisper, it feels like peace, like knowing, like a quiet certainty that doesn't need to shout. It says, not with drama, not with urgency, but with the calm of absolute truth, of course. It's already done. You're going to be fine. This is the way. But here's why that false voice feels so convincing. Here's why fear feels more real than faith. And this answer is going to disturb you, and then it's going to free you. The false voice is loud because it's afraid. Think about it. When you're terrified, when you're in real danger, you don't whisper. You scream. The false voice, the ego, the learned mind, believes that you're in constant danger. It learned very early that the world could hurt you, that people could reject you, that failure could destroy you. And so it stays vigilant. It stays loud. It tries to protect you by preparing you for every possible disaster. It thinks it's keeping you safe. But it's not safety. It's imprisonment. It's a prison guard who's convinced that the prison is the only safe place in the world. The real voice, the voice of your subconscious, the voice of God, is quiet because it knows something the ego doesn't. It knows you're eternal. It knows you're connected to infinite supply. It knows that what you call failure is just feedback. It knows that rejection is just redirection. It knows that you cannot be diminished because your essence, your true self, is spirit. And spirit can't be harmed by the temporary circumstances of the material world. So it doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to convince you. It just waits, patient, certain, for you to get quiet enough to hear it. This is why Jesus said, "Be still and know that I am God." Not think harder and figure it out. Not worry more intensely and plan for every contingency. Be still. Quiet the noise. Quiet the false gardener. Quiet the prosecutor who broke into the courtroom. And in that stillness, you'll hear what's been waiting for you all along. That quiet whisper that says, "I am with you. You are loved. You are guided. All is well." Now let me get very practical with you, because I don't want you to leave here with just a beautiful idea. I want you to leave here with something you can use today, this hour, the next time that voice starts screaming at you. So let's talk about how the subconscious mind actually works, and why everything you've been taught about controlling your thoughts is backwards. Your subconscious mind is not a narrator. It doesn't commentate on your life. It doesn't analyze, or criticize, or judge. It feels. It imagines. It creates. When you're in the shower and suddenly, without trying, without effort, the solution to a problem you've been wrestling with for weeks just appears in your mind, fully formed, that's the subconscious. When you meet someone new and within seconds, without knowing why, you just know whether they're safe or not, whether you can trust them or not, that's the subconscious. When you're drifting off to sleep and you hear yourself say, almost like someone else is speaking, everything's going to be fine, and you feel it as truth, as knowing, not as hope, that's the subconscious. The voice in your head that says, "But what if it doesn't work? What if I fail? What if they reject me? What if I'm making a mistake? What if? That is not the subconscious. That is the ego, the learned mind. The survival brain that's still convinced you're a caveman trying not to get eaten by a lion. It's trying to protect you from a danger that doesn't exist. And here's the tragedy. You've been listening to the warnings and ignoring the knowing. You've been obeying the panic and dismissing the peace. And that's why you're exhausted. That's why nothing seems to work. Because you're trying to use the wrong mind for the job. Let me give you the distinction that changes everything. The distinction that, once you really understand it, will end the war inside you. The ego speaks in words. The subconscious speaks in feelings and images. The ego argues. The subconscious accepts. The ego says, I hope. The subconscious says, it is. The ego rehearses disaster. The subconscious assumes fulfillment. Do you see the difference? The ego is always in the future, worrying about what might happen, or it's in the past, replaying what did happen, looking for evidence of danger, evidence of your inadequacy. But the subconscious is always in the now, in the present moment, in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, in the assumption that what you desire already exists. When you pray, when you visualize, when you affirm, you're not trying to convince the subconscious. You don't need to convince it, you need to impress it. And you impress it not with the repetition of words, not by saying something 1,000 times like you're trying to brainwash yourself, but with the feeling of the wish fulfilled. The subconscious doesn't care what you say. It cares what you feel is true. It cares what you assume. An assumption isn't a thought. Assumption is a feeling you've accepted so deeply that it's become your natural state. Let me tell you about another person, a woman named Grace. Grace came to me because she'd been trying to manifest a loving relationship for years. She'd done all the affirmations. She'd made vision boards. She'd written lists of what she wanted in a partner. And nothing. Worse than nothing, actually. She kept attracting the same type of man. Unavailable. Emotionally distant. Critical. And she was starting to think maybe she was cursed. Maybe she was unlovable. Maybe this was just her fate. I asked her to close her eyes and imagine she was already in the relationship she desired. Not to imagine meeting the person, not to imagine the first date, but to imagine it's 6 months in, a year in. She's already in love. She's already loved. What does that feel like? And she closed her eyes and tried. And within seconds, I watched her face change. Her brow furrowed. Her jaw tightened. And she opened her eyes and she said, I can't feel it. Every time I try to imagine being loved, another voice comes in and says, yeah, right. This will never happen. You've been single this long for a reason. Men always leave you. And I realize what I'm actually affirming isn't love. It's loneliness. I'm trying to cover up the loneliness with positive words, but underneath, I'm agreeing with the fear. I'm watering the weeds. And that's the moment she got it. She realized she wasn't failing at manifestation. She was actually manifesting perfectly. She was manifesting exactly what she felt as true. And what she felt as true, deep in her subconscious, was I'm not lovable. I'm not safe. Love hurts. So her subconscious, being the perfect servant, said, okay, you want evidence of that? Here's another unavailable man. Here's another confirmation that you're alone. Not because the subconscious is cruel, but because it's obedient. It gives you what you impress upon it. It creates your assumptions. So I taught Grace something very simple. I said, forget the affirmations. Forget trying to convince yourself of something you don't believe. Instead, go back to a time when you did feel loved. Maybe when you were a child, and your grandmother held you. Maybe when you were a teenager, and your best friend made you laugh until you cried. Maybe when you held a baby or a puppy and felt that pure, uncomplicated warmth. Go back to that feeling. That's real. That's not fake. And live in that feeling for 60 seconds before you fall asleep every night. Don't think about finding love. Don't imagine a future partner. Just feel loved. Feel what it's like to be safe and cherished and seen. And let that be the last impression before sleep, when your subconscious is most receptive. She did this for 3 weeks. And then something shifted. She stopped looking for love. She stopped waiting for someone to complete her. She just felt complete. And then, in the most unexpected way, she met someone. Not through a dating app. Not through a setup. Just through living her life. And the relationship was different from the beginning. Easy. Safe. Reciprocal. because she wasn't trying to get love anymore. She was living from love. And when you live from the feeling of the wish fulfilled, the subconscious brings the evidence. Now let me tell you what most people get catastrophically wrong. They think the goal is to stop having negative thoughts. They think they need to fight the ego, beat it into submission, achieve some kind of perfect mental state where they never doubt, never fear, never worry, and so they go to war with themselves. Every time a fearful thought appears, they panic. Oh no, I'm thinking negatively. I'm going to attract bad things. I need to think positive right now. And they try to force it. They try to plaster happy thoughts over the fear. But it doesn't work. Because fighting the false voice is still engaging with the false voice. It's still giving it your attention. It's still treating it like a valid opponent. Here's the secret. You don't fight the false voice. You starve it. And you starve it by refusing to identify with it. By refusing to answer it. When it says, you're going to fail, you don't argue. You don't say, no, I'm not. You don't defend yourself. You don't gather evidence for why you might succeed. You just notice, oh, there's that recording again. There's my father's voice. There's the world's voice. There's the voice of every person who ever made me feel small. And then you turn your attention somewhere else. You drop beneath it. You drop into the stillness, into the body, into the breath. And you ask your subconscious, what's true? And you listen, not for words, for the feeling, the knowing, the peace. Let me give you a metaphor that might help. Imagine you're sitting in a room and there's a radio playing, and the radio is playing static, harsh, loud, chaotic static, and you've been sitting there your whole life, listening to this static, thinking it's the only station, thinking this noise is reality. But one day, someone comes in and says, did you know there's a dial? Did you know you can change the frequency? And you look, and sure enough there's a dial, and you start turning it, slowly. And at first, the static is still there. But then, faintly, underneath the noise, you start to hear music, a melody, soft, beautiful. And the more you tune toward it, the clearer it gets, and the quieter the static becomes. That's what this is. The static is the ego, the false voice, the learned mind, and the music is the subconscious, the real you, the voice of God. You don't destroy the static, you just stop tuning into it. You turn the dial, you change the frequency, and you do this not by fighting, but by choosing again and again and again to drop beneath the noise and listen for the music. Now I want to talk about something that might make you uncomfortable. I want to talk about why the false voice feels so protective, why it feels like it's helping you. Because here's the thing, the ego isn't evil. It's not trying to destroy you, it's trying to save you. It really believes that, if it can just prepare you for every disaster, if it can just keep you vigilant and afraid and small, then you'll be safe. Then you won't get hurt. It learned very early, probably when you were very young, that the world can be dangerous, that people can hurt you, that taking risks can lead to pain. And so it made a decision. A child's decision. It decided, I'll keep you safe by keeping you afraid. I'll protect you by preparing you for the worst. I'll save you by making sure you never hope too much, never trust too much, never reach too high. And in a way, it worked. You survived. Here you are, still breathing, still alive. And so the ego says, see, my method works. Stay afraid, stay small, and you'll stay safe. But here's what it doesn't understand. Here's what it can't understand, because it's operating from a limited, fear-based perspective. Safety and aliveness are not the same thing. Survival and thriving are not the same thing. You can be safe and dead inside. You can be protected and completely cut off from joy, from love, from the fullness of life. And that's what the ego creates. A kind of living death. A gray existence where you never really fail because you never really try. Where you never really get hurt because you never really open your heart. Where you never really lose because you never really play. And the subconscious, the real you, the part of you connected to infinite intelligence, is watching this happen. And it's saying, quietly, patiently, this isn't living. This isn't why you're here. You didn't come to this earth to hide, you came to create, to love, to express, to be. And yes, that means risk. Yes, that means you might fail, you might get hurt, you might face rejection. But the subconscious knows something the ego doesn't. It knows you can't be destroyed. It knows your essence is eternal. It knows that every failure is just information. Every rejection is just redirection. Every closed door is just the universe saying, not that way, this way. And so it doesn't need to protect you. It just needs to guide you. And it does. Constantly. Through intuition. Through impulses. Through doors that open and doors that close. Through the quiet knowing that says, yes, this way. No, not that. But you can't hear it when the ego is screaming. You can't feel the gentle pull of guidance when you're gripped by panic. And that's why stillness is not optional. That's why meditation, prayer, silence, these aren't just nice spiritual practices. They're survival tools. They're how you learn to change the frequency, how you learn to drop beneath the static and hear the music. And I'm not talking about hours of meditation. I'm not talking about becoming a monk. I'm talking about 60 seconds. 60 seconds of closing your eyes and feeling into your body, feeling your breath, asking, what's true right now? What does the real me know? And then listening, trusting the first thing you feel, the first impulse, the first sense of rightness. That's the whisper. That's God. That's you. Let me tell you something that might shock you. Most of what you call anxiety is not actually yours. Most of what you call depression is not actually yours. Most of what you call your personality is not actually yours. It's inherited. It's absorbed. It's learned. You picked it up from your parents, who picked it up from their parents, who picked it up from theirs. Generational fear, generational limitation, generational pain. And no one ever stopped and said, wait, is this mine? Do I actually believe this? Or am I just repeating what I was taught? I worked with a man once who was convinced he was bad with money. He'd say it like it was a fact about himself. Like he was born with brown eyes and bad financial sense. And his life proved it. He'd get money, and it would slip through his fingers. He'd get a raise, and somehow his expenses would increase by the exact same amount. He'd try to save, and there would always be an emergency, an unexpected bill, something that wiped out whatever he'd managed to put aside. And he came to me defeated. He said, Dr. Murphy, I think I'm cursed. I think there's something wrong with me. I'm just not meant to have money. And I asked him, when did you first decide you were bad with money? He looked confused. I didn't decide it, it's just true. I said no. Somewhere, at some point, you accepted this as an identity. You agreed with a voice that said, you're bad with money. When was that? And he sat there quiet, for a long time, and then he said, my father. My father used to say, we're not good with money. It's not in our blood. We're workers, not investors. We make enough to get by and that's it. Don't get fancy ideas about being rich. That's for other people, not people like us. And I heard that my whole life. And I guess I just believed him. Do you see what happened? His father's limitation became his limitation. His father's fear became his fear. And his subconscious mind, which only knows how to say yes, said, okay, you believe you're bad with money? I'll show you evidence of that. I'll make sure money slips away. I'll make sure you stay exactly where you think you belong. Not because the subconscious is cruel, but because it's obedient. It accepts your assumptions as instructions. And this man had been walking around for 40 years, with someone else's instructions playing in his mind, his father's voice, his father's fear, his father's limitation. So we did something very simple. I had him start noticing every time that thought appeared. I'm bad with money. And instead of agreeing with it, instead of taking it as truth, He would say out loud, "That's not my voice. That's my father's fear. I reject that." And then he would replace it, not with words, but with feeling. He would close his eyes and feel what it would be like to be financially secure. Not to be a millionaire. Not to be rich. Just to be secure. To pay his bills easily. To have savings. To not panic when an unexpected expense came up. He would sit in that feeling for just 1 minute every morning, impressing it into his subconscious, planting a new seed, and within 6 months, his entire financial life changed. Not because he suddenly became a different person, but because he stopped identifying with his father's limitation. He stopped watering that seed, and he started watering a different one. And the subconscious, being the perfect garden, grew what he planted. This is the power of understanding whose voice you're listening to. This is the power of differentiation. Because once you realize that most of what you think is you is actually just programming, just recordings, just inherited beliefs, you become free. You become free to choose. Free to plant new seeds. Free to reject the prosecutor who broke into your courthouse. Free to fire the gardener who never worked for you in the first place. Now let's talk about the voice of God. Because I know some of you are uncomfortable with that word. You think it's too religious, too woo-woo, too out there. So let me be very clear about what I mean. When I say the voice of God, I'm talking about infinite intelligence. The creative power of the universe. The force that turns an acorn into an oak tree, that spins planets, that beats your heart, that heals your body, that dreams your dreams. Some people call it God. Some call it the universe. Some call it consciousness. Some call it the Tao. I don't care what you call it. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that it's real. It's here. It's now. And it's inside you. Your subconscious mind is your personal connection to this infinite intelligence. It's your direct line, your hotline, and it's always on, always available, always broadcasting, but you're not always listening. Because the ego is too loud. The voice of God doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. Because it's not afraid. Because it knows. It knows that everything is working out. It knows that you're guided. It knows that what's meant for you will find you. It knows that closed doors are blessings, that delays are protection, that what feels like failure is often just course correction. It knows all of this with a certainty so complete, so unshakable, that it doesn't need to convince you. It just waits for you to remember. And how do you hear it? How do you tune into this frequency? You get still. You get quiet. You stop asking the ego for advice. You stop rehearsing disaster. You stop arguing with reality. And you drop into your body. Into the present moment. Into the now. Because the voice of God is only ever in the now. It's not in the past, replaying your mistakes. It's not in the future, warning you of dangers that don't exist. It's here, right now. In this breath. In this heartbeat. In this moment of aliveness. And when you drop into the now, when you get still enough to listen, you'll feel it. You'll feel a sense of okayness, a sense of rightness, a sense of, I don't know how, but I know it's going to be okay. That's not hope. That's not wishful thinking. That's knowing. That's the subconscious. That's God. And the more you practice tuning into it, the louder it gets. The more you trust it, the more it speaks. The more you follow its guidance, the more guidance you receive. Let me give you a very practical example. You're facing a decision, a big one, a job offer, a relationship, a move, something significant, and the ego goes into overdrive. It starts making lists. Pros and cons. What ifs. Worst case scenarios. Best case scenarios. It's analyzing, calculating, trying to figure out the right answer, and you're exhausted. You're paralyzed. Because the ego can make a case for anything. It can talk you into it. It can talk you out of it. And you don't know what's true. So instead of asking your ego, instead of trying to think your way to the answer, you get still. You close your eyes. You take a few deep breaths. You drop into your body. and you imagine, just for a moment, that you've already said yes. You've taken the job. You've said yes to the relationship. You've made the move. You're living in that reality. How does it feel? Not what does it look like. Not what are the practical considerations. How does it feel in your body? Do you feel expanded or contracted? Do you feel light or heavy? Do you feel alive or drained? And then you imagine the opposite. You've said no. You've turned down the job. You've walked away from the relationship. You've stayed where you are. How does that feel? Your subconscious will tell you the truth through feeling. If saying yes feels like expansion, like relief, like rightness, even if the ego is scared, even if it's risky, even if you can't see the whole path, that's your answer. If saying yes feels like contraction, like heaviness, like you're forcing something, even if the ego is saying this is the smart choice, this is the safe choice, this makes sense, that's your answer too. The subconscious doesn't lie. It doesn't have an agenda. It's not trying to keep you small or make you prove yourself. It's just connected to the truth, to what's actually right for you. And it will guide you every single time if you learn to listen. But here's where people get confused. They think the subconscious should feel comfortable, should feel easy, should feel safe. And sometimes it does. But sometimes, the thing that's right for you is also terrifying. Sometimes the path forward requires you to leave behind something familiar, something you've outgrown, and the ego will scream. It will say, danger, danger, you're going to fail, you're going to regret this. But underneath the screaming, if you get quiet enough, you'll feel that whisper, that knowing, that says, yes, this is the way. It's scary, but it's right. Jump. I've got you. And that's the difference. Fear that comes from the ego feels like panic, like contraction, like I need to run away, I need to hide, I need to stay small. Fear that comes with guidance from the subconscious feels like excitement, like expansion, like I'm scared, but I'm alive. I'm scared, but I trust. I'm scared, but something in me knows. This is the next step. Learn to tell the difference, and you'll never be lost again. Now I want to give you some very practical tools. Things you can do today, this hour, the next time that false voice starts screaming at you. Because knowing all of this intellectually is wonderful, but you need to know how to practice it, how to live it. So let me give you 4 practices. 4 ways to differentiate between the voice of fear and the voice of God. 4 ways to reclaim your mind. Practice 1, the identity check-in. Multiple times a day, especially when you feel anxious or stuck or overwhelmed, pause. Just stop whatever you're doing and ask yourself this question. Is this my voice or is this a recording? Is this me or is this something I learned? And then listen. Really listen. If the thought is repetitive, if you've heard it 1,000 times before in the exact same words, it's a recording. If it sounds like someone from your past, your mother, your father, your teacher, your ex, it's a recording. If it feels like panic, like urgency, like you need to figure everything out right now or disaster will strike, it's a recording. And the moment you realize it's a recording, you label it. You say, out loud if you can, that's not my voice. That's my mother's anxiety. That's my father's limitation. That's the world's fear. I don't accept that as truth, and then you let it pass. You don't fight it. You don't argue with it. You just don't engage. You let it be like a cloud passing through the sky. There, and then gone. And you turn your attention back to the present moment, back to your breath, back to the stillness where the real you lives. Practice 2. The subconscious drop. When the mental noise is overwhelming, when the ego is screaming and you can't think straight, don't try to think at all. Drop into your body. Close your eyes if you can. Feel your heartbeat. Put your hand on your chest and feel the rise and fall of your breath. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel the weight of your body. And from this place of embodied presence, ask, not with words, but with openness, what does my subconscious know right now? What's true beneath all this noise? And then wait. Don't wait for a sentence. Don't wait for a voice that says, here's what you should do. Wait for a feeling, a sense of okayness, a sense of expansion or contraction, a visual, an impulse, a memory, a knowing. That's the whisper. That's the real you. And you trust it. Even if the ego is still screaming, even if it doesn't make logical sense, you trust the feeling over the thought. Because the subconscious doesn't speak the ego's language. It speaks in images and feelings, and intuitive knowing. And if you're only listening for words, you'll miss it every time. Practice 3. The nighttime impression. This is the most powerful practice I can give you. Every single night before you fall asleep, when your body is relaxed, and your conscious mind is tired and your subconscious is most receptive, do this. Don't review your day, don't worry about tomorrow. Don't make lists. Instead, imagine the version of you who already has what you desire. Not the journey, not the process of getting there, not the steps you need to take, just the end result. Imagine it's done. If you want a loving relationship, don't imagine meeting someone. Imagine you're already 6 months in. You're in love. You're loved. You're safe. What does that feel like? If you want financial security, don't imagine getting money. Imagine you're already secure. You pay your bills easily. You have savings. You feel abundant. What does that feel like? If you want healing, don't imagine the healing process. Imagine you're already well. Your body is strong. Your energy is vibrant. You feel alive. What does that feel like? Live in that feeling for 60 seconds. Just 60 seconds. Feel it as real, as true, as done, and let that be the last impression before sleep. Why? Because in that drowsy state between waking and sleeping, your conscious mind, your ego, your critical faculty, is offline, and your subconscious is wide open. And whatever you impress upon it in that state, whatever you feel is true in that state, it accepts as instruction. It says, okay, this is what we're creating. This is the reality we're assuming. And it immediately goes to work while you sleep, arranging circumstances, opening doors, giving you ideas, leading you toward the manifestation of what you've impressed upon it. This is not wishful thinking. This is scientific. This is how the subconscious mind works. It creates your assumptions. An assumption isn't a thought. It's a feeling you've accepted so deeply that it's become your natural state. So every night, you impress the feeling of the wish fulfilled. And every morning, you wake up a little bit more aligned with that reality. Practice 4. The sacred no. This is simple, but so powerful. When the attacking voice speaks, when it says you're going to fail, you're not good enough, no one will love you, whatever its particular brand of poison is, you practice the sacred no. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Not, no, you're wrong, let me prove it. Just a simple, firm, calm, no. No. That's not my voice. No. I don't accept that. No. Not mine. You're not arguing. You're not engaging. You're simply refusing to identify. You're drawing a line. You're saying, that voice doesn't speak for me. I don't agree with it. I don't believe it. I don't authorize it. And then you return. You return to the stillness, to the breath, to the present moment, to the whisper underneath the noise. And you ask what's true. And you trust what you feel. These 4 practices, if you do them consistently, will change your life. Not because they're magic, but because they're training. You're training yourself to differentiate, to tell the difference between the voice of fear and the voice of truth, between the ego and the subconscious, between the false gardener and the real you. And the more you practice, the easier it gets. The false voice will still speak. It's had years of practice. It's not going away overnight, but it will get quieter, and you'll get faster at recognizing it. And one day, you'll notice that you haven't answered it in hours, in days, that you've been living from the whisper, from the knowing, from the peace, and the war inside you will be over, not because you won, but because you realized there was never a war to begin with. There was just a prosecutor who broke into the courthouse, and you asked him to leave. Let me tell you one more story before we close. A story about a woman named Sarah. Sarah had been struggling with depression for most of her adult life. She'd tried therapy, medication, self-help books, meditation apps, everything, and some things helped a little, but nothing really changed. She still woke up most mornings with this heavy weight on her chest. This voice that said, "What's the point? Nothing matters. You're just going through the motions. Why bother?" And she was starting to believe that maybe this was just who she was. Maybe she was just a depressed person. Maybe this was her cross to bear. She came to me as a last resort. She said, "I don't even know why I'm here. I've tried everything. Nothing works. I think I'm just broken." And I looked at her, and I said something that surprised her. I said, "You're not depressed." And she laughed. A bitter laugh. She said, "Yes, I am. I've been diagnosed. I've been this way for years. Trust me, I'm depressed." And I said, "No. I don't mean you're not experiencing depression. I mean you are not depression. Depression is not your identity. It's a state you're in, a frequency you're tuned to, but it's not you." And then I asked her, "Whose voice says what's the point? Is that your voice?" She stopped, and I could see her really thinking about it. And then she said quietly, "It's my mother's voice. My mother was depressed my whole childhood. She never said it out loud, but I could feel it. The heaviness, the resignation, the sense that life was just something to endure, not enjoy. And I swore I'd never be like her. But here I am, saying the same things she never said but always felt." And right there, in that moment, something shifted. She realized she'd inherited depression. She'd absorbed it like a second language, and she'd been speaking it for so long that she thought it was hers. But it wasn't. It was her mother's pain, her mother's resignation, her mother's unprocessed grief, and Sarah had been carrying it, honoring it in some unconscious way, as if letting it go would be a betrayal. I taught Sarah the practices I've taught you. The identity check-in, the subconscious drop, the nighttime impression, the sacred no. And I gave her one more instruction. Every time that voice said, "What's the point?" she was to answer it. Not by arguing, but by saying, "I release you. I honor your pain, but it's not mine. I release you with love." And then she was to ask her subconscious, "What wants to be born in me? What wants to come alive?" And she was to listen, to trust, to follow the whisper. It took time. This wasn't an overnight transformation. But slowly, week by week, the heaviness lifted. The voice got quieter, and something else started to emerge. A curiosity, a lightness, a sense of possibility. She started having ideas, impulses. She started painting again, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. She started reaching out to old friends. She started saying yes to invitations. And one day she came to see me and she said, "I don't know what happened, but I feel different. I feel like me, like the real me, that was buried under all that weight." And I realized I was never broken. I was just carrying something that wasn't mine. That's what I want you to understand. You're not broken. You're not uniquely damaged. You're not cursed with a negative mind or a difficult personality or a depressive temperament. You're just carrying voices that aren't yours. You're just answering a prosecutor who has no authority. You're just listening to a gardener you never hired. And the moment you realize that, the moment you differentiate, everything changes. You don't have to fix yourself. You just have to remember yourself. You just have to come home to the real you that was always there, always whole, always connected to infinite intelligence, always whispering beneath the noise. So let me bring this all together. Let me give you the transformation I promised you at the beginning. You came here maybe feeling exhausted, feeling like you're at war with yourself, feeling like you've tried everything and nothing works, feeling like maybe you're just one of those people who's stuck, who's limited, who's never going to break through. And I've shown you something that changes everything. The voice in your head, The one that's been narrating your inadequacy and predicting your failure and keeping you small is not you. It never was. It's a collection of recordings. It's inherited fear. It's the world's voice speaking in first person. It's a prosecutor who broke into your courthouse, a gardener who never worked for you, a radio station you never chose. But beneath it, beneath all the noise and all the panic and all the endless mental commentary, there is another voice. Quiet. Certain. Unshakable. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It simply knows. And that voice is your subconscious mind. That's the part of you directly connected to infinite intelligence, to God, to the creative power that spins galaxies and beats your heart and brings you every answer you need exactly when you need it. And it's been speaking to you your entire life. Through intuition. Through knowing. Through the quiet sense of rightness that you've been dismissing as wishful thinking. Through the peace that passes understanding. And now you know the difference. You know how to tell which voice is which. You know that the ego speaks in words, in worry, in what-ifs, and the subconscious speaks in feelings, in images, in knowing. You know that the ego argues and doubts, and the subconscious accepts and creates. You know that the ego lives in the past, and the future, and the subconscious lives in the eternal now. You know that the ego is loud because it's afraid, and the subconscious is quiet because it's certain, and you have the practices. You have the tools, the identity check-in, the subconscious drop, the nighttime impression, the sacred no. And if you use them, if you practice them every single day, you will train yourself to live from the whisper instead of the scream. You will train yourself to stop answering the false voice, to stop watering the weeds, to stop obeying the imposter, and you will start living from the real you, the you that is whole, the you that is powerful, the you that is directly connected to everything you need. So let me leave you with this, a truth that you can carry with you, a mantra, an affirmation, not one you need to repeat 1,000 times to convince yourself, but one you can feel into right now as true. Are you ready? Here it is.